Louisiana's high school dropout problem isn't new, but the state superintendent of education is. We sat down with John White recently to find out about new initiatives targeting an old problem.
There are a lot of challenges that our kids are facing today. A lot of those challenges stem from challenges that exist in home from the time that they're born. And anyone who sits here and says that poverty isn't a challenge in the learning of children, or that it's easier to educate kids today than it was 20 or 40 or 50 years ago, is just wrong. It's hard. The American family fabric is fraying. It's getting really, really hard to educate our kids. On the other hand, we've got to be real and know that school sometimes is playing doctor, school sometimes is playing nurse, school sometimes is playing family as well as educator. And that means that the best thing we can do is make sure that our schools are organized in a way where they say, we've got a plan for every individual child. Maybe this child is on his or her way through honors classes and on to college. Maybe this child needs a career path. Maybe this child needs to be considering an organization like the military after graduating. Maybe this child, however, is 2 years behind because she did spend some time out of school because she was giving birth to a child. And so the question of how we're going to recuperate or recover credits for her, how we're going to get her back on track, that's really one that the adults who are closest to that kid need to be planning around.
There's been a new study out that says the key years are 7th and 8th grade. Louisiana's been focusing on the 9th grade years for interventions. How are we going to utilize this info in order to keep our kids from giving up if they fail the 8th grade high stakes test?
There's been a strong focus on 9th grade as a critical year to provide a safety net for kids and really make sure kids are getting the credits they need in 9th grade. But when you look at our efforts around our Connections program to catch kids up in middle school and get them, accelerated into high school, when you look at our efforts to actually start early and start with early childhood literacy, I consider all of these things to be real efforts that provide for a child to be prepared by the time they take that 8th grade test.
Are we looking at more K through 8 schools and fewer junior high or middle schools in order to keep the parents engaged with their kids' schooling?
The district where I was superintendent, in the Recovery School District in New Orleans, we primarily had a kindergarten through 8 model. I think it works. I think it's helpful to minimize the number of transitions that kids, especially kids in poverty, have to face. So I'm a fan of it. But sometimes the practical realities of it are such that you can't do it. Maybe your buildings just simply weren't built for that and don't fit that number of students. So yes, in principle, absolutely, we should minimize the number of transitions that kids have. The K through 8 model is good, but it doesn't replace one way or the other ensuring that parents are well informed, that they know what's coming next and they know how well their child is doing. Parent engagement and schools having a plan for continuing to keep parents invested in the academic success and progress of their kids, that's huge. So whatever way you do it, you got to do that.
Now, your predecessor was a huge fan of Jobs for America's Graduates, the JAG program, but it actually teaches kids how to work in fast food. It's not careers. Is there something better we could be using to prepare these kids to become functioning members of society?
This is perhaps the most important question that we've got facing us, which is what happens to our kids when they leave our schools? I mean, it seems so obvious, but it's unfortunately not asked enough. Let's think about this for a second. 48% of our kids end up going to college. 11% of our kids are certified to do some specific profession. Well, that's 59% of our kids. So what happens to the other 41%? Well, right now, about 20% of them don't graduate from high school. There's another, though, 20% that do graduate from high school, and we don't actually know exactly what their next step is. So we've got a big problem because we've got 40% of our kids who are not prepared to participate in the American economy of the 21st century. And so what do? My answer is this. I don't think that we can ask schools to solve every problem themselves for training the workforce of the 21st century. I'm an English teacher. I was trained to teach Macbeth, not to teach auto engineering or not to teach petrochemical work. And yet in this great state, we've got a tremendous economy with a wealth of, whether it's hospitality and tourism in the New Orleans area, whether it's petrochemical, oil and gas up and down the western and southern parts of our state. We've got a tremendous industry sector that our kids should have a vibrant future in. Let's invite industry in to actually itself provide some of the courses for credit to train kids for the workforce. That's why I'm so fired up about our course choice program. That program basically says to industry, apply, educate, we'll give you the funding through our core funding formula to educate our kids, but we need you, industry, to prepare our kids for the next generation.
When you taught, did any of your students come to you and say, hey, Mr. White, I'm thinking about dropping out. Here's why. And what did you say to them? How did you intervene with them one-on-one?
You know, I said, let's talk about the facts. What does your life look like if you're a high school dropout? What does it look like if you're just a high school graduate? What does it look like if you're a college graduate? You know, it actually looks like something profoundly different. It's a difference between making $75,000 a year and making $20,000 a year. That is a stark reality for that child. And then you start to invest the adults around them. Maybe it's the coach, maybe it's the aunt, maybe it's the friend. And they start getting them saying the same thing. And you form that safety net, and then you can get that child back on track. It's important to have interventions. It is important at a local level in that school to have a plan for the needs of every single child. I don't think it's the state's role to come in and say, here's an exact program for recovery of students' abilities in 7th grade. Here's an exact state program for 8th grade. It's about that school. And the best thing that we can do is put that school in a position to make that decision by holding them accountable and empowering them to do that kind of planning. I think we've got the right incentives. I think they've got the right autonomy to do that kind of work. We're going to support them in doing what's best for their schools.
Accountability is a major component in White's educational philosophy. It doesn't stop with the schools, the teachers, or the parents either. He says students themselves have to take responsibility for their success or failure.
The best thing we can do is hold them accountable for academic outcomes. Never compromise on that, but support them in helping them get there.
For the Southern Education Desk, I'm Sue Lincoln.